Hey, what's up, everybody? It's me, Paea Han, and you are watching the Paea Han Show. So, a lot of people have reached. Hey, what's up, everybody? It's me, Paea Han, and you are watching the Paea Han Show. I want to talk about some of my favorite, scariest TV shows growing up in the 90s. Now, in the 90s and the early 2000s, this was like prime time for scary shows, scary programming for like young adults. And so if you grew up in the 90s and the 2000s, you had a lot of awesome scary TV shows. Now, I don't know if you guys remember a lot of these shows, but some of these were really, really terrifying, and you almost felt like, should I be watching this? Like, is this appropriate? You know, as a young adult, you're kind of like, man, I kind of feel bad watching this because this is so like terrifying, like, and creepy. You know I'm not going to sleep tonight, or I'm going to sleep in my parents' bedroom tonight because I am absolutely terrified from watching this. So my first favorite, my number one overall favorite scariest television show of all time would have to be the original Are You Afraid of the Dark, which premiered on Nickelodeon, and it was on usually at nighttime, right before you got to go to bed, and you watch that show and you couldn't sleep. I mean, these episodes were terrifying. Like this was like almost some adult horror, and the writers were really amazing at putting together some really great stories. And at this time, you had the Goosebumps series going on, okay, and you were basically competing with R.L. Stine for the same type of short, scary stories when you came into this arena. But the problem is that you had to be very careful not to copy R.L. Stine or copy Goosebumps like a lot of shows did, and you had to come up with something that was unique and individual and separate of the R.L. Stine series. So you got Are You Afraid of the Dark, which was this amazing television show for young adults, aired on Nickelodeon. Basic concept, was the kids around the fire telling ghost stories, telling scary stories. And even the intro, got you going. You were like pumped up when it started. So probably my top three favorite episodes of Are You Afraid of the Dark, kind of going in chronological order. Number one would have to be Dead Man's Float. Okay, this episode freaked me out and made me terrified of swimming and going in the deep end. I think most of you guys have seen this episode because it's so iconic. It's basically about this ghost monster thing that dies in this swimming pool at a school, and this boy that's on the swim team ends up encountering this creature that would come out of the water and like try and pull kids to the bottom. And I remember the first time I watched that, like, I had to go the next day to the swimming pool, and I didn't want to get in the water because it just like freaked me out that much. And I think psychologically it messes with you because, swimming's something you do all the time. And when you go into the deep end, you can't touch the bottom. You can't really see the bottom that well. So you don't know what's down there. Is something going to pull you down, take you down, underneath the water, or, what's under there? And I think that sort of adds to the creepiness, and they played into that very well in this episode. Taking advantage of people's fear of kind of like the deep water and being in the deep end and being in water where you can't really see, or thinking there could be something in the water with you. And so that was a really good episode that played into just that natural fear of swimming or being in the deep end. Second favorite episode would have to be The Cold Ghost. And this is a little known one. I don't think a lot of people remember this episode, and anytime I bring it up, people are like, was that actually an Are You Afraid of the Dark episode? And yes, it was. And it actually starred Clarissa Clarissa, sorry, from Clarissa Explains It All. And it was kind of like her big role before she landed Clarissa Explains It All, right? This was like her first role, big acting role in a short television show that kind of propelled her career forward and led to Clarissa Explains It All. And you'd see her in this episode, and she did an amazing job acting. But basically, this is an episode about a young boy who dies in the cold, and this boy and his babysitter are visiting, like, I think grandparents or someone, or these two old ladies, and they stay there, and this ghost boy keeps reaching out to this young boy saying, like, I'm cold, please help me. And he can't figure out, you know, why this ghost keeps appearing to him, and he's like terrified. And his babysitter's like, why don't you see what he wants and talk to him? And he finds out that he simply just wants his coat, to find his coat, because he's cold, and when he finds that, he's able to pass on to the next life. But I used to see like images of that young boy because they made him so terrifying in the show. And I would like think that I would see him places, and it was just, it kind of messed with your head, because it was one of those episodes where, like, you know, ghosts are a really terrifying subject sometimes. And so when you have this young ghost boy that's visiting you and like saying like, hey, I'm cold, it's just more terrifying, because it feels like something that could actually happen. And, you know, you feel like this is something, you know, I could experience. So when you're at home late at night, or you're out in the woods or something, and you think, you know, I could see a ghost boy here, and it freaks you out. But yeah, that definitely was creepy, because like I said, just the young boy saying like, please help me, I'm cold, you know, over and over again. And just the way that he looked, and they made him, you know, look like this creepy ghost, very pale face, kind of blue, and played into that just natural old-time ghost story of a ghost looking for something or searching for something. So that was probably my second favorite. My third favorite episode of Are You Afraid of the Dark would, and I apologize if I get this wrong, I think it's The Grinner or something along that lines, but it was basically the episode where the boy like finds a comic book, and it's like a haunted comic book, and this character from the comic book is like chasing him, and I believe he like leads him to some secret facility or something, and he's like trapped in all these different rooms. But I just remember that comic book character was really creepy, and it had like this iconic grinning face, and it kind of stuck with you, you know, and you know, I can still think about it today. You can remember that face because it was so creepy and iconic. And what I thought was interesting about that episode is they did a good job not to copy the mutant, Phantom Mutant, or whatever that's called, the Goosebumps episode. They did a really awesome job of not trying to copy that concept, and they sort of made their own unique version of sort of a kid who's obsessed with comic books and jumps into a real comic book. And I thought that they were able to create a whole different episode that wasn't a copy of the Goosebumps book. But those are probably my top 3 favorite episodes of Are You Afraid of the Dark? Probably the creepiest, I think, by far. I'm sure there's other ones that were terrifying, and I didn't mention them, but to me personally, those are ones that I felt like affected me the most when I was young, that creeped me out. And then you had, so after Are You Afraid of the Dark, another scary television show you had was So Weird, which was on the Disney Channel. And I think this actually was like the Disney Channel's first attempt at trying to make some sort of scary television programming for young adults. And So Weird basically followed this young girl, Fee, who traveled with her mom, who was a musician, and she had a friend, and I forget his name, but he's also in Brink, and I apologize, I can't remember his name, but it had a couple famous actors in there, and basically she travels with her mom, her uncle, and a couple other people on this bus, and they go to different cities and different locations and have paranormal encounters or strange encounters. And almost every episode is just absolutely terrifying. But probably the scariest one to me was the first episode of the first season, where it's based on the Eastland tragedy up in Chicago, where you had the ship, the Eastland, that capsized and turned over, and almost everybody aboard died right there on the Chicago River and before it even left dock. And it was just this huge tragedy, and a lot of the bodies were brought into the surrounding buildings in that area, and several buildings, including the Harper Studio, which is where Oprah Winfrey used to do her show. A lot of people had encounters and experiences with people that looked like they were drowned victims, like they were covered in water and looked like they just experienced a tragedy. And they kind of played into this real story and made their own story out of it, where Fee goes to this building where her mom's doing a concert, and she encounters this ghost boy who was aboard the ship. And once again, he's looking for something, and she helps him out. But I thought that was neat that they basically played on real events and came up with a cool storyline. And so they used some elements of reality and combined that with a cool storyline. And, you know, it was one of those episodes where you felt like, once again, you know, like this could happen to me, you know, I could experience this. And that's what made it so terrifying. And they did a good job with the ghost boy, where they made him look very realistic and seem terrifying, to where it wasn't like, you know, they did a good job where it wasn't like this was like evil looking or something menacing. It was just the look, you know, kind of stuck with you. It touched you. It sort of made you feel something, and you felt like, okay, this is terrifying, you know. Like, that was really neat about these shows, is they didn't have to get gory or make these creatures look demonic or just super menacing. They could do so with just, you know, basic makeup and a little bit of lighting effects. They could make this person really scary and terrifying and make it something that would stick with you. But So Weird was just this amazing television show. And not only was it terrifying and creepy, the storylines were really good. You know, there was like a lot of neat stories that they did, and kind of, it was more than just, you know, creepy and scary. It was kind of like this family bonding and working together in this awkward situation. And it was kind of neat because you have a family that's much different than the normal family at the time. You had a mom, single mom, who was a musician, who had her daughter and her, you know, other family on this tour bus with her. And it kind of, you know, the experiences and encounters that they went through being in that situation. So it was kind of interesting to see that too, and to see some representation for like a single working mom, and her, you know, and her children having to go along and cope, you know, with this whole situation, and how that sort of played into some of their experiences. It basically, the best way I could describe So Weird is kind of like a kid version of Supernatural. Like if you took Supernatural and you did a kid version, that would be So Weird. And it was actually before Supernatural, but it sort of reminds me of Supernatural, but like a kid version. After that, I think when we go from actual television shows to reality, there was a show called The Scariest Places on Earth. And it actually had, sorry about that, there was a ball in here and it just moved on its own. So that was just really creepy. As I'm doing the show, ball sitting on the floor, it moved on its own. So yeah, that was kind of terrifying. But continue on. Scariest Places on Earth. This was a show that had Zelda from the Poltergeist series, right? And she basically played, she was narrator to this show, where she sort of narrated some of the most scariest places on Earth. And you see, it's like this, it was actually the first take at a paranormal reality show, but it was based for young adults. And she would narrate this show, and they would take you and show you like some creepy places across the United States or across the world. And what made it terrifying was Zelda's voice, and her narrating it kind of just gave you the heebie-jeebies, you know? And to me, it was put together where it wasn't like too over the top and over dramatized. It was just basically, they were giving you the rundown of some of these creepy places and what happens there. And so it was very interesting, very unique, one of a kind. Definitely think that it was probably the best paranormal reality show that I ever seen of all times. And they did a really good job of making it so that it wasn't over the top and that it was reachable to young adults. And it was sort of, I would say, like, you know, it was sort of layered down, but it wasn't too layered down that, you know, you couldn't follow it, or you would think that it wasn't terrifying. But it definitely was an awesome show. And looking back, I think that was probably one of my favorite paranormal reality shows. And so I apologize because I'm having trouble talking, because like some weird stuff is going on as I'm doing this episode here. So this is kind of creepy because it's actually talking about the paranormal and weird stuff's happening, which is interesting. But no, but yeah, those are probably my most favorite, scariest TV shows for young adults. And growing up, those were probably my favorite shows to watch as a young adult.